friends in the room and also outside there on the web. And of course, most likely everyone feels like we want to break free, we want to be free, we want to determine our lives, we want to be creative, we want to co-create our future. But the question is, how does that really work? And there are different ideas about it. Some idea is that we should just have a competition for the strongest. And the strongest, who is most successful and accumulates most money, has most power and determines how the world works, and everyone would have to play along. And that, of course, is troubling many, because people are different, and people need different frameworks, conditions, in order to flourish. And I'd also like to point out that we know mathematically from the area of game theory that there are certain issues. If everyone selfishly optimizes and looks for the best solution for themselves, the system may go down. We may have a so-called tragedy of the commons. This is well known since about 50 years, I think. And it has been applied to people, or basically to justify why we now need to have a centralized control of the world in order to avoid this tragedy from happening. But it turns out people are actually not that selfish as it's often assumed. Most people not. But companies are, because they do maximize profit. They're supposed to, because they need to satisfy the stock market. And so a tragedy of the commons, or something alike, that means a situation where selfishness drives the system into a valley of tears, is expected to happen. And it's happening. Now, we can make libertarianism work under one condition: if we consider externalities. And I will talk about today how to do that, how we can make it work. So I've mentioned already this tragedy of the commons. This is based on so-called public goods games, or also prisoner's dilemmas games, social dilemmas. These kind of dilemmas exist since thousands of years, right? Humans have had trouble sorting out solutions for that kind of thing. And so I was looking for basically a slide on blockchain, on tragedies of the commons, or tragedies altogether, dilemmas, and on also altruism. And this is one of those slides. You see the prisoner's dilemma mentioned over here. And this slide relates also to effective altruism, one approach that has been discussed for a long time, and one of the proponents was him. It didn't end so well for him, and so in a sense this is a warning for all of us that while we're engaging into all sorts of adventures, we still need to be a bit cautious, and science may sometimes help to avoid mistakes. Now, I've been mentioning that we need to consider externalities. That means our impact on the world, our effects on the environment, on other people. Same thing, of course, applies to companies. And I've been working on an idea that I called interaction support processor, which was aiming at creating digital infrastructures that basically help systems work out well while people interact with each other in a distributed way, or companies do. And so there are all sorts of ideas like creating a social mirror, or a social adapter, social protector, social money. So I'll talk about money today. And even a cultural adapter, or culturopedia system, basically to make, to help the different cultures interact with each other fruitfully, synergetically, symbiotically. But so far, many of this doesn't exist. And I hope this will change today, because there are a lot of people in this room and outside listening, and I hope I can inspire you a little bit. Because coordination so far is not working large scale in the world, we have a top-down approach, a big data approach. And this big data approach is combined with AI. AI, some people expect to be superhuman pretty soon, and perhaps more intelligent than all people on this planet in about 30 years from now. I mean, you don't have to believe that, but don't be surprised if it happens. In any case, many people have been thinking about how we could use big data, basically run the world in new ways, in a cybernetic way, to replace governance by cybernetics. So data would be governing the world. And so basically, there is the attempt to create an operating system for the planet. Not just for your smartphone, not just for your computer, but an operating system for the entire planet. And this has been in the work for decades. You know, hundreds of billions have been invested into this. Most people don't know much about it. And the idea of some of these people is to run the world from a control room, or sometimes they also call it a war room. So if you had all the data, you could see what's happening out there in the world, you could see the problems, and you would want to fix them quickly. And so it's a military approach to fix the world. And a very similar approach is also found in many big IT companies these days. So for example, Tristan Harris has been talking about how the Google control room he's been working in has been manipulating the minds of billions of people, including yours. And the overall idea is basically that we could now create something like an AI-based benevolent dictator, data-driven. So basically create an algorithm that would optimize the world, determine the optimal future, and then basically enforce this path towards this optimal future, also by manipulating your thinking, feeling, and what you do. Because otherwise you would mess up this optimal outcome, and probably you feel it. I'm quite skeptical about it, and it has to do with the fact that optimization sounds good, but it's based on a one-dimensional goal function. Otherwise, you cannot optimize. You have to compare two solutions, and you have to make greater, smaller operations, so you need one-dimensionality. And of course, that one-dimensional goal function is a gross oversimplification of the world. And that's why the best of all worlds created by a benevolent dictator is not digital paradise. It feels like hell, you know? And we need to have a different approach, a non-utilitarian approach, and I will tell you how to do that, okay? So, a benevolent dictator, what would that AI system do? It would want things to be plannable, predictable, and controllable. This is, of course, not so well compatible with democracy and freedom. Plus, even if you wouldn't care so much about this, what would the benevolent dictator do? So, most likely try to determine everyone's utility function. That means what you care about, how much, what's important for you. So that would need mass surveillance, and it's happening. And then basically, the system would determine the average utility function, and then find the optimal solution to this average utility function, which would be the goal function, and then implement that. Is this the best of all worlds? I doubt it. because the average utility function may serve and even represent nobody well. We are not average people, we are all different, right? So it could be that actually that seemingly optimal solution is quite bad for everyone. But anyway, people have attempted to build this control room approach towards creating a better world. And in fact, there are different forms of society, all data-driven, all AI-based, all AI-controlled, all cybernetic societies. And here, probably not even all of them. Many of them have been tried out silently, secretly. So we have not been informed about this. I would say consent is lacking for this. Legitimacy for this is lacking, but they've been trying out different kind of systems. They're still doing that, and most of them have performed poorly, and that's why they move on to try out new systems until there's one system that works. But what they haven't done is try out digital democracy. I will talk about this today. I'll just touch upon one of those systems, cashless society combined with digital ID, because yesterday evening we've been discussing a little bit this subject. So this is obviously one of the ideas that is around. And many people do worry that it could end up like a surveillance nightmare. Probably a justified concern. So it would be possible basically to store all your consumption patterns forever, all your transactions, buying, selling, plus it would make our consumption patterns controllable. If you eat too much meat from the point of view of certain people or an AI system, if you fly too often, if you are not supposed to have a car using carbon fuels, basically you could just stop the transaction. You would not be able to do what the system does not like you to do. So basically it's a totalitarian system, and still people are thinking about it because the idea is, we could now micromanage the economy and societies all together, and wouldn't that be great? So basically having totalitarian systems in the past failed just because we did not have enough data, we did not know enough about the world, and now we know everything, and so basically now it's going to work. Well, again, I'm quite skeptical, I'm quite worried, and I guess many of you too. And also, you need, for such a system, a digital ID, and that would be potentially more dangerous than you think. The different ways of implementing this, one of them is pretty unknown, based on converging technologies, basically using nanotechnology to make everyone's body measurable, to turn your body into a password and passport, and the bank account would be comfortable, I agree, but your entire movement patterns could be checked 1,000 times a day, so everyone who has access to the system could know where you've been at any time and whom you've met. And that would certainly not be anything like a democracy, I would say. Plus, there are scientific concerns, because the idea here is that we could basically create a better world by controlling every single component of this world. All the people, all the cars, or the TV sets, all the companies, and so it's a so-called component-oriented approach. And this is based on the idea that the system is characterized by the properties of the components. So if we know the properties of the components and control those components, we know the system and we can control the system. But this is entirely wrong since the digital revolution. Because we have networked the system. We have networked everything almost, right? And those network connections create interactions. Those interactions create forces. Those forces create changes. And those changes are often, as I will show you on this slide, unpredictable. So in many cases, they're not the intended effects. They're side effects. They're feedback effects. They're cascading effects. So those network interactions make things uncontrollable in that component-oriented way. You need to have a systemic view. You need to understand the world as a complex, dynamical system, and not like a simple controllable system such as a car. In fact, even though a single car is well controllable, the interaction of many cars is not. This is a simple task, to drive in a circle to avoid an accident and also a traffic jam, and the traffic jam is just there. It happens because very small deviations would amplify, delayed reactions would cause overreactions, people would brake a little bit stronger, next car even stronger. This will stop vehicles, the traffic jam is there, and importantly, nobody wants this to happen. You know, we have modern technology here, everyone is well skilled, has a driver's license, perfect visibility, the best intention, you know, and still something that nobody wants happens. And this is not an exception, right? It happens on many streets every single day in almost every country in the world. And in fact, there are many similar problems based on systemic instabilities that show that we just didn't get it. You know, we have the wrong way of thinking about the world. So crowd disasters is another example of people dying even though nobody wants anybody to die. Then we have often unstable supply chains. We know it from booms and recessions throughout the world. We have also unstable social dynamics. We have those tragedies of the commons that I mentioned before, like overfishing, environmental change, and many other examples actually that are pretty much unsolved still. Conflicts throughout the world, in many cases not intended, you know. Just also think of couples who marry, you know, and at some point in time, many of them will face a divorce, and that was certainly not planned, so you know, something went wrong, and same thing can happen between countries. So systemic instability, revolutions as well, okay? And if we want to understand these systems and fix those problems, then we need to have a different approach, because we have basically tried everything. We've had big data for a long time now. We have had AI already for some time, and still things haven't been better. As if you open the newspaper or watch TV, it seems like every day things get worse, you know? And I will show you it happens as predicted. Okay, but before I go into this, let me introduce you a little bit into the nature of complex dynamical systems. And what you see here is 6 simulations of pedestrians interacting with each other. It's all based on the same equations, a social force model, which has some model parameters in it. Those model parameters have been varied a little bit, and that makes quite some difference in terms of the systemic behavior, right? So on the right, you see groups forming. On the left, you see the crowd is always in some dynamics. And in the middle, you see that people are distributing over quite some space. So pretty different behaviors. And even AI will not help, I think, really to get control of complex dynamical systems. And just to give you an idea, I show you here the game of life. Everyone knows it. A very simple cellular automaton based on 3 simple rules. produces patterns that sometimes are, at least look, non-periodic, surprising, given its simplicity. Of course, you could store all those data produced by the game of life. You could teach or have an AI system learn this dynamics and basically reproduce it. And most likely you would do that with a model with, say, 1,000 parameters or 1,000,000 or even 1,000,000,000, you know, if you can afford it. And it will approximate this dynamics, but it will not return you these 3 simple rules. So there's some asymmetry. It's simple to produce complex dynamics, but it's difficult to understand it sometimes. Now, it's a similar asymmetry as between encryption and decryption, right? Okay, now there's no doubt we're in an age of big data. Now we have enough data to take good decisions in principle if we interpret data right. However, there's still an issue because data volume overtakes processing power. Data volume just grows faster than processing power. And that means that there's dark data, data that will never be processed, and the percentage of dark data goes up every day. Right? So things will get worse, basically. We need to know what data to process in order to get good results. If we leave out the wrong kinds of data, then basically we'll be misled by the system. So dark data is a problem, and networking can also lead to new problems. So systemic complexity is increasing even faster in a combinatorial way. It's a factorial function, I believe. And so even though we have the best technology ever and more data than ever in human history, we are losing control of the world as we try to control it in a top-down way. We need a new control approach. Unfortunately, there is one, which is bottom-up control based on self-organization. That self-organization, I will show, can be assisted in a digital way. So we can use the same technology, but we should use it in a different way. There are many examples of complex systems, turbulent fluids, traffic flows, large supply chains, social, political, economic, ecological systems, financial markets, group dynamics, crowd behavior. This is just the beginning. And also our brain and immune system, ecosystems, and entire societies are complex, dynamical, self-organizing systems. Now, all the important systems are complex, dynamical systems. You know, that means this kind of class that we have not paid enough attention to. These systems are based on self-organization. The brain, the immune system, systems, and so on, society. How does it work? Well, we have to acknowledge their limits of predictability. And even if you would have 1,000,000 times more data, it would never be able to predict the weather in 100 years on Tuesday, January the 2nd, exactly. Why is that? Because we know some physics of that process, and it includes the phenomenon of turbulence. And turbulence has this feature that under certain conditions, very little changes will have a large effect after some time. Even the slightest change, even invisibly small changes, would have a massive impact on the long run. There are other systems that have a similar behavior in a sense. You may have heard of the Lorentz attractor that produces strange attractors or deterministic chaos, as people say. And here you see this strange attractor, and it turns out that even if you have two trajectories very close to each other in the beginning, eventually they will behave very differently. And this is called the butterfly effect. It has even made it into the cinemas. Butterfly effect is really hard to imagine, I admit it. Like the idea is, if a butterfly flaps its wings, under certain conditions, not always, of course, it could really turn a calm weather into a storm in 3 months from now. It's kind of really hard to imagine. But hey, there's mathematics behind this, and it even gets more puzzling if you look at this double pendulum. A very simple mechanical system, we would think this is perfectly predictable, but it turns out it actually shows deterministic chaos. And if even such a simple system behaves chaotically, then how much more chaotic would the world behave? Then, of course, we can try to control chaos. There's chaos control, in fact. Here's just a simple example. It's an oversimplified model of an ecosystem, a predator-prey system like rabbits and foxes, say. And there's a Lotka-Volterra equation system that describes that dynamics. And we assume that the perfect ecological equilibrium would be here, the red cross. And a hunter would try to push the system to this point. But instead, we'll end up somewhere very different, namely over here. That means the intention may be fine, but the outcome is not. This is just when trying to control two variables. Just suppose we are trying to control 1 million or 1 billion variables at the same time. How much more failed control attempts we'll see. That doesn't mean control is doomed. I'll show you here a different control attempt. First, we're simulating stop-and-go traffic on roads. It's based on mathematical equations that allow us to understand why stop-and-go traffic appears. And then eventually we'll turn on a traffic assistance system. But it's not a traffic center that controls every car. So now we're annoyed. We take a helicopter. We'll see what the cause of that stop-and-go traffic is. We'll see this on-ramp over there, right? So cars are trying to squeeze themselves on the freeway. That produces small disruptions. Those will be amplified. It causes stop-and-go traffic. We'll turn on the traffic assistance system. Cars will be able to use a laser or radar sensor basically to measure distances and relative velocities, and that data would be used for an adaptive driving of the car. It's an autonomous car, so it will be able to accelerate and decelerate differently from drivers who see the traffic jam is gone. Even though the same number of cars enters the freeway per time. So it's the same traffic volume. Still, we were able to dissolve the traffic jam by actually changing the interactions. We've used real-time data for real-time feedback to change the interaction slightly. And even if only 40% of cars would do that, it could dissolve that traffic jam. So we neither need the traffic control center, nor do we need every car to behave according to that algorithm. It's just that we managed to induce coordination, to support, to assist coordination among cars by slightly changing interactions. It's the interactions that matter in complex dynamical systems, okay? And so I'd like to say that with the Internet of Things, we can now make self-organization work. 300 years after Adam Smith's invisible hand concept, which also means self-organization, Now, it took 300 years. Now we have the technology to make it work, So importantly, complex dynamical systems tend to self-organize in the sense to do what they want. But this is not necessarily bad if we know how it works. So establishing suitable interactions will produce desirable outcomes by itself. We don't have to force the system anymore. there's degrees of freedom, even if there's some variability, if not everyone behaves exactly as this formula would suggest, it would still work. Of course not if everyone just ignores those principles entirely. But there's freedom inbuilt, okay? This is important. So mechanism design is basically the way to make this work, to learn how to shape those interaction mechanisms that can be done actually by real-time feedback, okay? So there is a new paradigm to go from control to coordination. And we've learned that also from pedestrians, one of my research areas. So you can see over here at the bottleneck, we see oscillatory flows of pedestrians. There's no police telling people to do that. There's no traffic light even. It just happens based on pressure building up and being released. And so basically, the system makes this happen itself by self-organization. And then we saw, hey, that's cool. Couldn't we build a traffic light control based on self-organization? Couldn't we have the traffic flows control the traffic lights rather than the traffic lights control cars? Of course, that's a dictatorship in our democracy now. Why can it still exist? It does not have to be this way. Because we actually showed that this can create large-scale coordination by self-organization. So you see green waves happening here, which are not enforced top-down, but they happen by self-organization. And it really works. It has been implemented. For example, in the city of Lucerne in Switzerland, you can see up there the state-of-the-art system that they had before. And it does enforce green waves, as you can see, but it has a lot of red color in this plot, which means waiting times. While after it was changed to the self-organized control solution, on the bottom you see much less red color, which means much less waiting. And we still have green waves, but they're not so regular. This system uses gaps in the traffic flow. It uses them as opportunities. It does not enforce it, okay? And it's much better. They're stunning improvements, even though it was supposed to be the best system on the market that they had before, okay? So, in other words, going from top-down control to bottom-up self-organization can improve systems, can improve their performance, cannot control everything top-down. Also because many problems are NP-hard, computationally unfeasible. So, in conclusion, informational-assisted self-organization works well, is efficient and resilient, can handle reasonably large deviations and perturbations, is compatible with freedom, democracy, and human rights. So, hey, that's the solution we were always waiting for, isn't it? Let's do that. Okay, I promised to talk about new kinds of money. And I mentioned Internet of Things, so how can we use it basically to make this dream happen? So there's a book, it's even open access, so you can download it, feel free to do that. And it proposes a totally different financial system, a socio-ecological finance system. And importantly, it goes away from that utilitarian approach, that one-dimensional approach, which basically all the economic optimization, profit maximization, all that classical approach is based on. It introduces many kinds of money that are not frictionless, convertible into each other. That's important, because otherwise it comes down to one sort of money again. Okay, so this will already change something if you go from a utilitarian approach, a one-dimensional approach, to a multi-dimensional one, okay? And the way I propose to introduce these new kinds of money is to base it on measurements as they can be made with the Internet of Things. So what we have proposed in this book is to combine Internet of Things technology with blockchain technology. Would not necessarily have to be blockchain technology, but could be, okay? And so there are many measurement procedures, measurement for temperature, CO2, for noise, for humidity, for whatever you care about. And you can measure that. And that measurement can be turned into money and into incentives. And those incentives will be able to change people's behavior. And if we do it well, then basically this can improve our environment. It can help to self-organize our society. Even I formulated that a bit strange, I should say, we could allow our society to self-organize in this way. Because this is taking into account externalities. I will come back to this later on. I've also proposed some time ago to invent something that I called investment premium. It's a bit similar to basic income, but also very different. It would be a new kind of money which you could not spend for yourself. You would get it every month, everyone would get the same amount, and you could invest it into companies, into social projects, into cultural projects, into environmental projects, whatever. You can invest this money. You cannot use it for yourself. Okay, and that would be like voting every month for projects that you think would improve the world. Yes?
Yeah, do you get the fruits of the shares that you invest in, or do you just decide for this amount where the amount goes? Is it investment with profit or without?
I think both would be possible. We have been thinking this as a system that would not necessarily imply a profit on investments, but I'm fine with adding this aspect too, you know.
It's not you investing, then it's you decide.
Yes, but I think this is really very important that the people would decide where to invest money and what projects should be going forward, because then I think we would have the kinds of project that we would really need. There are many bullet points over here. I won't read them, but it's being recorded, so you can have a look. And I should say, so far, we have not been able to get this investment premium idea implemented, unfortunately. Hopefully, it will still happen one day. But something similar has been happening. And this is called participatory budgeting. And we'll come back to this, but I will talk a little bit more widely about the concept altogether. And so I will dive into the subject of digital democracy. How to make democracy work in the digital age. Obviously, it's not doing very well at the moment. Some people think it's an outdated technology. I personally think we should upgrade it with digital technology. I think democracy is about, among others, enabling distributed knowledge and collective intelligence. It's making the best out of all our ideas and talents and engagement and resources. So, this is inspired by swarm intelligence. We're often very impressed by what we see out there in nature, and among them is those beautiful flocks of birds that amaze us for the coordination ability. And there's no lead bird that tells every other bird how to fly, in what direction. And in fact, the idea is old, it's also 300 years old, that society could basically work like a beehive in a self-organized way. Yes, there is a queen bee, but that queen bee does not hand out commands and tell every other bee what to do. It basically lays eggs. So there is self-organization that makes this wonder of the beehive happen. And a similar thing is known from humans. Humans, of course, are much more complex than bees. And we talk not about swarm intelligence there, but about collective intelligence or of wisdom of crowds. And there have been quite a few books about it, and it's really stunning. And I think we could use this to learn how to build digital democracy. So it's about learning to bring the best ideas of many minds together. And a nice example, I believe, is the Netflix prize. Netflix has a recommender system. They hope to make their customers more happy with this, with good recommendations of the movies that they would enjoy watching. And they had their big data approach, but they wanted to be better because they were not satisfied with how predictive it was. So they said, okay, here's $1 million. Take it if you manage to improve our algorithm by 10%. You know, everyone said, oh, that's easy, you know, let's do it. And there were many teams kind of engaging into this competition. I think for 2 years or so, nobody managed to improve for more than 10%. And then one day, the best performing team, as far as I recall, was combining their algorithm with other algorithms that were performing more poorly than theirs. So you'd think, how stupid is this? You know, it would make your algorithm even worse than before. But just the contrary happened. Now, out of a sudden, they jumped over the 10% line, they got the $1 million, you know, and so basically combining different approaches is often better than even the best expert solution. Sorry to say that. That's the wisdom of crowd, okay? But it does not automatically happen. There's also sometimes the madness of crowd. So there need to be some organizational principles for wisdom of crowds, collective intelligence to happen. And an organization in several phases is helpful, like having an exploratory phase where many different kinds of participants would basically go out, look for information, try to come up with solutions independently of each other. They should not be influenced in that phase. Modern search engines would influence everyone. You know, it's kind of, they are not helpful for this process, not made for this. They're manipulative. Second phase, information exchange. Only then do people come together and talk about their ideas, their solutions. And in phase 3, they would try to integrate solutions, and combine them with each other to come up with better solutions. So there's deliberation that creates new solutions. So there's innovation happening by talking to each other, okay? And then in the end, we would have perhaps several integrated solutions. If it's not one everyone agrees with, then we would have to vote. And that's not a bad thing. Voting is actually quite an interesting approach. It does not require everyone to agree on the goal function. You could all have different goal functions, but you could vote and there would be a result. So we don't need to assume the one-dimensionality of the optimization approach, right? Now, it turns out, however, that the most common ways of voting, majority voting, are actually quite bad. Among the worst, actually. There are several issues, like it could cause what people call the tyranny of the majority. Or it could, in the worst case, it could be a tyranny of the minority even, some minority. And also, you don't get spatial fairness when talking about how money is being distributed over different districts of a city. Then, of course, in some districts there are more people, they have more votes, so basically they can determine where the money goes. So, as a result, the periphery is often forgotten, and that creates social tension over decades, and these are very hard to fix right now. So, spatial fairness is not ensured by majority voting. So, we need a better system, okay? We need different ways of voting. And so, what is voting about? It's about voter preferences on the one hand, figuring out what you want, okay? And you express that typically through a ballot, could be also done in a more sophisticated way, and those expressions, those ballots, then go into a ballot box, and there's a vote aggregation, which then determines the democratic outcome. So there's an input method, measures the preference, and an output method or aggregation method that determines the final outcome by basically summarizing over the votes in one way or the other. And we have created a smartphone app in order to make experiments with different kinds of voting methods in the lab, or also online experiments could be done with this. And there are different kinds of voting, and I mentioned just a few of them to show you some of the differences. So there's approval voting, where you could basically put one for the solutions that you like. And there's combined approval voting, where you can also abstain, which is 0 here, or disapprove, which is -1. And so this is already more differentiated than just approval voting. Goes into the ballot box. And what really worked a lot better, of course there are many input methods, I cannot mention them all over here. What worked very well is asking people to distribute 10 points. And you could basically accumulate points for the projects that you like most. So you can express the intensity of your liking. And as it turns out later on, this is much better than approval voting. So this is one thing we can improve, the input method. The other method that we can improve is the output method. So traditionally, we do the majority voting. And suppose it's about selecting a project, and projects do have costs, but actually the majority voting does not even care about costs. It would just basically select those projects with most votes until the budget is used up. And all the other proposals will go their way to the wastebasket, typically, right? However, you could also do it in a different way. So you could divide votes by cost and say, oh, let's go for those projects that have most votes per cost. Okay? Then it turns out you get a very different selection of projects, and rather than, I think it was 2 projects, we can actually select 4 of them, right? And there is a method called equal shares. That's a little bit similar to this idea of the investment premium, where everyone gets a virtual sum of money, same amount, and you distribute it over the projects, and all the projects that accumulate enough money will be put in practice. Okay? Now, importantly, those different approaches will produce different outcomes. For the majority voting, you see on the left, you often get a situation where one project consumes most of the budget. And then they will say, oh, sorry to all the other projects, we don't have any money left. That's a pretty typical situation. But you could make a lot more people happy if you had many projects, and you get this with the knapsack approach, or also with equal share. So this really makes a big difference. Now, we have actually tested this in reality. In the city of Aarau, it was called Stadtidee. We did that in Switzerland. And so basically, there were brainstorming sessions. So you see Mentimeter in the background. And there was a map, and people could basically put sticky notes at the map with ideas that they wanted to be implemented. Okay, this is how it all started. In the beginning, we had about 161 projects. And then there were additional meetings, basically figure out which projects can be put together, which projects cannot realistically be implemented or financed, and which projects do have sufficient community support. So it's just not like they are saying, oh, somebody do this for us, please, but it's more like, we're going to commit to this project and help it come reality. And so in the end, there were 33 projects, basically those over here, people could vote on. I could vote with ballot boxes, but also electronically. It was announced all over the city, and this is the outcome. So you see, basically, those projects that had most votes per budget were winning, even though we were using this proportional fairness approach. Now, why is it a lot better? Because with a majoritarian approach, majority voting, we would have received only 7 projects, and would be concentrated in the centers. I mean, it's a very unfair distribution of money. With our new approach, which was before tested in a laboratory for legitimacy and trust, the new approach was liked very much by the citizens. It selected 17 projects, and they were distributed all over the city. All districts got some money. Plus, it was a lot more representative and inclusive. There were more young people, more elderly people, more women, more foreigners who were contributing to this. So those people usually feel left out. They saw the opportunity to make a difference. And in conclusion, we can say, yes, democracy can be upgraded. We can have more projects approved and realized. We can have more resourcefulness. We have more participation, more inclusion, more transparency, more trust, more satisfaction, and more fairness. And you cannot reach that by optimization, by data-driven, AI-controlled optimization. It's a social process that matters here. Okay, so one should, or could, I think should actually implement more democracy, not less. Questions, can it be efficient, right? So we typically think of deliberative democracy, and more people participate it takes, the more frustrated people get. In the end you have a compromise, but often everyone is unhappy. This can be made in a different way. We have worked on an approach that we call remixing, peer production. So suppose everyone could develop solutions. They would be available digitally on some platform. Everyone can download those solutions, modify them as they like, upload them again. Yeah, a little bit like GitHub, I guess, and or Wikipedia. GitHub more than Wikipedia even, I would say. Then basically there are many solutions, some of them popular, others not so much. Populars will be further improved and others will be forgotten about. And so there's this is a branching process, is like a tree in a sense, is a peer production, okay? Co-creation also, importantly. Then, however, the important point is, can we still evaluate all those proposals? Suppose you would have to review hundreds of proposals. Everyone would get very frustrated about that. So we need to have a distributed voting approach, a peer review approach. Say everyone just looks at 10 randomly chosen proposals and rates them. And then if we want everyone to involve in the end, we could create a short list and would have everyone vote about, say, the top 10 list. And importantly, even though nobody has seen all the proposals, nobody has full control, it will deliver a very good solution. So, we don't need to control this process. It's a distributed process from the beginning to the end. And if we do that in the right way, that means we have we share all those solutions in an open source, open access way, Creative Commons, then we do have a situation where we have a very steep innovation curve, but also at the same time a maximum fairness among majorities versus minorities, because everyone can benefit from other ideas, no matter from what camp they come. Yes?
I want to ask you for your last slide.
Yeah.
Like this, only 10 people see all of that. Was it researched how big the starting population needs to be for this to work out? I highly doubt this to work out with a group of 150 people. I see this working out in a group of 5 million people.
Yeah, so in fact, this is part of the ongoing work. There's one publication which is out, which you can find over here, but there are 2 more, at least, publications following. So interestingly enough, the expectation is this approach works better the more people participate, while the deliberation approach works better the, if not too many participate. I don't think we need 5 million for this to work, to be honest. But if it were 1,000, for example, I think it would already be working tremendously well, and even with less, I would expect it to be pretty stunning in its performance. All right. So all of that speaks in favor of the making culture. Some people have even proposed to apply making to entire cities, like an alternative approach to smart cities in a sense. And we have even proposed to take it up to global level, to address the global challenges of humanity. And we call this City Olympics, or City Challenges, or City Cup. So we know that nation states and United Nations have tried to fix the problems of the world. They have failed to do it on time, frankly speaking. Same thing with global corporations. They've tried as well, they've promised they will fix everything, but it hasn't happened on time. So we need new approaches, perhaps complementary approaches, and that's the do it yourself and do it together, the City Olympics. And so the idea is basically to have a combination of competition and cooperation. So cities would compete with each other, say every year or every 2 years. There would be different disciplines like reducing energy consumption, reducing carbon emissions, whatever you care about, improving solidarity, helping other people, environmental projects. Anything could be a discipline, okay? And so cities would compete in those different disciplines. Everyone could contribute, companies, media, scientists, citizens, and basically they would develop new solutions and try to implement them, and it would be compared among cities, and there would be then a best-of list of solutions created, and those would be open source and Creative Commons. So everyone could use them in the second phase, to basically develop them further, to combine those different approaches, to adjust those approaches to your local conditions, to your budget, to the cultural context, or whatever, okay? So basically, it would be a pluralistic competition for combinatorial solutions. And we have proposed that for sustainability-related quantities, and basically the idea is to go for localization rather than globalization. And what is this about? It's about thinking global but acting local and diverse, to experiment, to learn from each other, to help each other. We've done that. We've done these making projects. We have created own hardware and own software, and we had hackathons, and communities have been contributing to these competitions. And so the idea is to combine the success principles of various systems, like the best of the best, combine combination with collective competition with collective intelligence, experimentation and selection, and intelligent design, right? So we are not ideological here, we just try to combine the best of the best with each other in an innovative and constructive way that would be able to help many people. And so how to use that to address, among others, sustainability problems, which are probably among the biggest challenges in the world right now. Most people would agree if we would go away from those wasteful supply chains of today, where we use a lot of new resources to produce mass products, push them on consumers by advertisements, then they would throw it away and it would be waste. If we could turn that into a circular economy, the prospects, the future of many people in the world would increase dramatically. Okay, but we cannot get there, not by force, not by legislation. And so how to get there? So I do think we can make it happen. Using the Internet of Things, but using it in a different way. Not to collect as much as data as possible in one centralized place and keep them forever, but in a participatory way, in a distributed way, and also forgetting about the data again. Because nature has fixed circular economy. You know, the nature is circular, so we know it's possible to create a circular system, and so we can learn from nature. How does nature do it? Interestingly enough, it does not have a supercomputer that collects all the data about the forest or the entire world and then try to optimize a solution and then impose it on the entire system, enforce it, control the system centrally, keep these data forever. No, it's not working this way. It's all distributed, right? It's local, it's temporary, and it's participatory. And so how can we create such a system? Okay, so I told you externalities need to be considered to improve the world. So we should and we could map noise, temperature, environmental change, also good things, you know, like people's happiness, culture, jobs people like, whatever. So basically we can measure externalities, but the goal is to increase positive externalities, to reduce negative ones, and to ensure fair compensation. All right, and this brings us back to those new kinds of money that combine Internet of Things measurement with, for example, blockchain technology to define new currencies that would create new incentives, that new market forces that would make everyone change behavior or production or consumption a little bit in response to the situation they find. So a co-evolutionary process would set in. Everyone improves in response to everyone else's improvement. There's a co-evolution going on, basically. And this is the way how we would get towards a circular and sharing economy. Now, importantly, a multidimensional approach would be a huge paradigm change, okay? Nature does not use one control variable like dollars or so, right? It has many feedback loops, carbohydrates, proteins, many vitamins, minerals, and so on. Now let's compare just a typical supply chain of today, pretty hierarchical, pretty linear, with what nature does. This is a metabolic network, that means how digestion works in a body. And you see, this looks very different. And here suddenly you do have circular elements.
With nature, do you mean wherever organic, like organic evolution made us go? When you say learn from nature, I pictured it like the seasons before, and I think it's very, very vague and hard to differentiate, but this sounds like the outcome of evolution.
Yes, exactly. This is what I have in mind. So yes, this is the outcome of millions of years of evolution, but we don't have to wait for millions of years because we can basically learn from how nature does these kind of things. And now importantly, there are suddenly these circular elements, right? And here we suddenly have a situation where we cannot say anymore who is in control. Say if A influences B and B influences A, then who is in control, A or B? So basically what I want to say is you have to give up on control in order to allow this circularity to happen. As long as you're trying to force such a circular system by control in a top-down way, I don't expect this to happen. Rather, we need to have this bottom approach, this coordination-based approach, and self-organizing and co-evolutionary approach in order to get there. And this is what I have proposed with this new money system that I just suggested before. So basically, the idea is to have an evolutionary process which creates increasing levels of symbiosis between different levels of the system. So not one would determine the lives of everyone else. And we have made a very interesting experiment. You know, we have been introducing voting into traffic control. We have been democratizing traffic in a sense. So we've assumed that different cars would have, or different drivers would have different goal functions, right? Some want to minimize travel times, others want to minimize stops, others want to minimize fuel consumptions, others want to minimize CO2 emissions, and so on. You know, let's have people have pluralistic goals. At each intersection now, there's a different percentage, a different composition of these types. And they will vote. And then the traffic light will basically respond to that voting. And interestingly enough, the result is that we get away from the old-fashioned efficiency-oriented optimization, where yes, there's one goal that we achieve in an optimal way, but the system performs poorly with respect to other variables we care about. Instead, you would get a system, that's the orange triangle instead of the blue, where we have high performance on several variables that matter. So we have a pluralistic approach, and this can be enabled by those voting procedures. So I'm coming to the end. I'd like to thank you for your interest and attention. I'm asking you to be a game changer because obviously the old systems don't work any longer. I think the success principles of a complex world of the future would be co-principles like co-learning, co-creation, coordination, cooperation, co-evolution, and change is coming. So contribute to it. Create this chain reaction. And here's one more paper I'd like to mention on participatory resilience, where we are describing resilient system based on people's activities and what kind of digital system we would take in order to allow people to take their own fate into their hands also in situations of crisis. Plus, there is 2 science fictions I've recently co-created with ChatGPT, where I'm addressing some of the issues I'm worried about, and also try to hint at some of the solution approaches. So if you're a science fiction fan, I hope you'll enjoy this. And the link down there also does not require you to log in. Thanks so much. That was it. My best fan, critical fan.
I'm everybody's best critical fan. So what I see is that all of this has been researched, and rightfully so, under the paradigm of a given society, a given, nation state, given populations that are already up and running and so on. And another way of turning this completely upside down, not bottom up, but in the conceptual way, is you create a new society and let people opt in, and this is what we do here to a degree. And this is another completely different game changer. And I see many concepts that are handled here completely dysfunctional in our world. Because of, not completely, but deeply. Democracy and collective intelligence. This tells me that it's researched like this would be the only overlap. If we if we have an opt-in society, and if we want to be autonomous and independent, we will have to have an academia function, an epistemic function that is segregated and totally separated even from the decision-making function, where we have different stakeholders on different levels. And of course, this is a solution that can work in already established systems and is very important. But I think that there is, and you presented a lot of good concepts, and I think we can take a lot of value from them. I just want to call the reminder, if we think through these concepts and how we can apply them, we should really be aware about this fundamentally different prerequisite, that we don't start with a society that has by chance these and these needs and need to self-organize, but we have the luxury of actually picking the people, or generating these societies ourselves, and this would partly be lost in translation. Which is not a criticism to your talk, because it was legitimately researched for the already existing ones.
All right, thank you very much. I'm very much a fan of opt-in. I don't agree with any forced systems. I do think that this approach can work in an incentive-based way, and that it's based on the idea of growing communities, self-organizing. So not that far away, but I'm a bit skeptical about having kind of a million different societies in the world that are disconnected. I do think that we're still also living. Yeah, that's not necessarily so, but potentially so. I mean, we need to also keep the social cohesion, I think, in mind, because we're also living, most of us, in the real world, not only in the online world. And cohesiveness is, I think, has gotten lost in recent years to some extent, and it creates some of the problems and stresses and also hate that we see in society, and I think we need to keep that in mind, at least.
This is an exit strategy model that exactly these hates can be mitigated by you can leave if you don't want it. And I think it's totally legit to have 10 millions of these. We are very digital first and crypto first, and of course we have digital platforms for interconnecting many of these on a free and non-coercive basis. But I don't think that there's a problem, or the hate in overall humanity is the problem that will arise because we create these exit nodes and a decentralized future where we can have many experiments and many different places to live with low exit costs between each other.
Okay, thank you very much. Very much appreciated, but there are other voices as well. Yes, please, go ahead.
So you've obviously spent a lot of time with complex systems, and complex systems have in them attractors. I'm just wondering if, in your experience, if you could share an attractor that you discovered or you came across that you found shocking or just beautiful or sort of like the butterfly.
Yeah, in fact, in my PhD thesis, I've been working on deterministic chaos as well. I've been looking into opinion formation models. These were abstract models in a sense, not necessarily fully realistic. But they produced also a very beautiful strange attractors. We shouldn't be guided too much by strange attractors though, because it's also a very particular thing and only an approximation of reality. But it's good to be aware that these kind of things do exist, and we should not assume the world to be predictable and controllable, because that's what many are currently trying to do, to control and predict the world. And I think this is very much cutting down on our freedom and creativity as well. Okay, next one. Yes.
Okay, thank you for this talk. I would like to comment on many aspects
Sure.
of it, but we are already a bit late, so I'll just limit myself to a question, not a comment. How do you deal with voter apathy? Because a lot of voter apathy, a lot of new ideas you are discussing are how to better aggregate different ideas, different viewpoints, different needs, and so on. And I do agree with that. We already came up with really, really good alternatives to the current system that we know work in certain conditions. But you know, even best solutions do not really work if no one shows up. And we can see this even in like blockchain environment. There are a lot of projects that are using, for example, quadratic funding or quadratic voting to distribute enormous sometimes amounts of money in like participatory budget way. But they are not attracting that many people. And obviously even quadratic funding is a huge improvement, no matter how many people are actually participating. But if you want to actually utilize the wisdom of the crowd, it really does matter if 500 people show up or 5,000 or 50,000. So how to make people actually more engaged and how to make them vote, actually.
Yeah, I think what they're mentioning is basically a fragmentation. So some people are committed to Wikipedia and others to other kinds of communities. If you sum up how many people do something, it's probably quite a lot. If you care about how many people contribute to one particular thing or platform, then it can be quite a few, and basically it has to work for few people as well as many. That's kind of the challenge, needs to be scalable. I do think that as people see that their voting has some impact on reality, on the projects that are being implemented, on the future, people will be engaging more. Now, I certainly want to co-create the future, my future in particular. I guess many of us do want to do this. My feeling is I don't have much control even of my future these days, because digital systems have taken over, and you know, there's these invisible boundaries in many places, and so I don't think we have a co-creation system at the moment. This is very frustrating, in fact, and I hope we'll be able to overcome this soon. As it turns out, this is the proof that needs to be given, that these bottom-up co-creation systems perform better altogether than the top-down controlled ones. So they're more creative, more innovative, have a better performance in a sense. Perhaps we have to look at different performance measures as well, but this is what I think matters. And so if we have good examples to show for bottom-up co-creation is better, and I'm sure tons of examples, but most politicians don't know.
For everyone's information, we'll start with a 12 o'clock session, so we have 5 to 10 more minutes for questions, and then a quick break. I have the next question here.
Hi, so it seems that unlike most academics, you actually had some of your ideas implemented in the real world. Some of your early work, it seems, like for traffic control and crowd control. Are you engaged with policymakers now on some of your bigger ideas on democracy and participatory decision making?
Yeah, I must admit, even though we've been pushing for this consistently over the years, I do feel some frustration. I've been sitting in all sorts of political committees for some time, and I had the feeling there were basically more to give the impression that now everything is going to change, but it was just basically delaying action and it never happened. So it's kind of more to absorb criticism rather than to improve the system. And I feel very much cornered, very much limited in what I can do at the moment, because to some extent, some of these ideas are revolutionary in the sense that I could change systems fundamentally, and some people don't want to see that change. But I do believe that good ideas will eventually win through. And it will make it. So I do hope that other people will be picking it up and it will happening in other places. And it does happen in other places. Actually, sometimes in quite remote places, which I lost track of for some time, like India. It turns out that some of the ideas I've proposed have found fertile ground over there and have been scaled up and were making quite some difference. So, don't lose hope and just get going and try to implement some of those ideas to make them scalable.
Yeah, so I thank you for this. It's really insightful and exciting. We tried to build a startup built on a lot of these principles a few years ago, and the reality was that, at least for us, you need to get to a certain scale and success, as sort of, I think Burns touched on, before those crowd dynamics maybe start working. Have you got any advice or input or learnings in terms of getting things to that scale where they can be implemented, and potentially like any thoughts on how you get from 0 to 1? Because definitely the reality experience of building something is that this works in theory but doesn't work in practice for a startup trying to build exactly this future.
Right. I do think that we should not give up if we're convinced that we're on the right way, because there's a lot of resistance. There's kind of adversaries who are trying to undermine, for example, democracies and these distributed approaches. It's a power struggle in a sense, but I do think distributed scales better. So eventually it will win through. Now, what can we make in order to succeed more quickly? I think collaboration across different initiatives is better. I know everyone wants to have their own blockchain or system to be proud of, but importantly, we would build digital ecosystems that basically amplify each other, that strengthen each other. So together we can create more functionality, a bigger community, and more power. And perhaps that can happen in a forum like this one over here, that you stick your heads together and agree to do something together to some extent. So the ecosystem allows you to have your own thing, but also it would be collaborative and would be creating something bigger. Yes?
Is the delaying and subsequent political frustration the result of the basic fact people don't really want to give away power? That progressive decentralization, for example, doesn't really work historically?
Yeah, I do agree that there are some people who just like to stick to power, but it's toxic for the environment and for humanity, and it has become a matter of life and death to some extent, even, I would say. So we really need to win this competition and make it happen. I do.
Can I throw something there? I think it's too simplistic to say that people like to stick to power.
Some, I said.
Yeah, even some. I think that the bigger problem that we've seen is that when you try not to stick to power and you try to do things, nothing necessarily happens. I think it's very much too idealistic to just like put an idea into the world and hope that people will help you build it. It hasn't worked out like that in the past for us, and the reality was that, you know, you build something, you try and decentralize it, and then you end up with an illegal entity that has a lot of costs, and you're the only one paying for it. I think it's just too simplistic to kind of like think that people aren't trying to do that and failing. And we need better systems in place that support people that want to try and do that. And where it's cheaper to do that, where you're not setting yourself up for ending up alone with a lot of costs, basically.
No, I understand this fully. I think now, in fact, we want to empower everyone digitally, kind of to give everyone more abilities to contribute to a better future, right? So power per se is not a bad thing, but I think this huge inequality in power, this is an issue, and it's not compatible with democracies, and it's not compatible with bottom-up principles, and here we need to make some progress. And yeah, I know distributed systems are more difficult to build, so if you just want to be the first to build some functionality, you often would not do it in a distributed way. It takes often more time, more effort, more costs. Still, we are eventually learning how to do that, and we can learn from each other, and we learn how to make these systems scalable. So I still think it will win eventually, and will be the fundamental principle of the future. But we're not there yet. It could be, however, quite around the corner. I mean, not far away, a few years perhaps. So yeah, just keep faithful.
We have a quick comment and a quick question. Yeah, actually, it's a bit late now, but I just wanted to add on the power thing that I think there is two sides. Like every time we say something, there is an opposite, and it's not so much that people want to stick to power; it's that there is also a large group of people that don't want to take responsibility, or they don't have incentives for it. So it's always like there is an opposite statement. And other than that, I really enjoyed the talk. I'm doing an experiment on Friday, a new way of coding and like starting a project with some of those ideas, and
Right.
are invited to join us.
Okay, thanks. Sounds amazing.
Hey, thank you. What do you think of incentivizing people with illiquid tokens, or to run for elections to increase political participation, like to create their own political parties, or to like give them these tokens to reach KPIs, like the online reach of the parties that they created, or just like paying them again with these tokens to ask other people to write down their intentions to vote at specific dates and times in order to again increase that participation, or like alternatively, if this what do you think is the quickest and best way to effectively increase this participation?
Yeah, I would take an experimental approach, but based on digital ethics, and it's based on participants that have agreed with the experiment. So we often do lab or online experiments to compare different kind of mechanisms and see what works better, what people like better also. So that's not even very costly these days. On the other hand, I'd like to come back to the point of money. I know many people want to be rich, but honestly, I do hope that not too far from now, nobody would think and have to think about money anymore. That would be for me a real utopian future where we don't waste our time on thinking about how to earn money and how to spend it. This is so old-fashioned and outdated, you know. And then some of the idea of this money-based system, you know, it comes across like, hey, there's even more money. It's like we made kind of appeals to greed of people, but in fact, the idea is to kill greed by greed, you know. And how do I mean this? I think what is really important is to overcome this utilitarian, one-dimensional optimization approach. You know, even though it may sound good at times, I think it's very harmful to the world, and we need to have a much more pluralistic system. And basically, multidimensionally destroys utilitarianism, and with this, the basic of the current financial thinking and kind of profit maximization, nothing else matters, you know. So basically, this would allow everyone to contribute and be kind of getting reward for contributions, but their own contributions. You would not have to first submit to an economic system in order to then earn some money, to then live on that money, and then be allowed to do what you want to do with a lot of restrictions. So, you know, I really want to have financial freedom in a sense, like, in the end, nobody should even think about money anymore. That would be my dream.
And I love that as well. Also, like, would love a society like post money, where, you know, humanity, like Star Trek, The Next Generation kind of vibe. But like in Romania, for example, we have, I think, like 40-50% of people voting, and you have like a core of people from the old social democrats or liberals that basically it's like 1 million or so people and their families. They consistently vote, and then there's kind of the rest of the people that don't vote as much. So like for me, it's, hey, it has not been going that great for the past 40-something years. How do I attract the rest of the people to also go and vote? And then I was thinking that, incentives kind of drive behavior, and like, how can I actually, like, what's my quickest and best way of, you know, increasing that political participation? And like, if you have any, I don't know.
I think if people feel it really matters and their voice does or could make a difference, then they will be more active. And we have seen that in the last German election, where people got worried about the future of democracy, and we had a record turnout, were more voters than ever. And this is a good sign that even though democracy seems to be crumbling, people still believe, many people, not everyone, but a lot of people still believe in democracy. And now that's make it better, that's upgraded with digital means, you know, to serve us, to be able to make better contributions to the future.
Thank you. I think this is a good note to end on. Thank you very much, Dirk. It was
You're
a pleasure.
welcome. Welcome, thanks.